This is the Vegas Huddle with Mike Davis.
Welcome inside the den, the Vegas Huddle. I'm your host, Mike Davis. Today we have a very special guest with us. Yes, this guy is the GM, the general manager of the NBA G League Ignite, who are changing basketball here in our community in Las Vegas. I'm so excited to have on the podcast one of my favorite people, and I just met him, GM Anthony McClish. Anthony, great to be with you. Thanks for being here. So much to talk with you about. I know when we met a few weeks ago at practice, I had taken to so much of your journey. This is what I want to know. Before we get into everything, the devotion that you've had on this ride so far, it's remarkable. I've never seen somebody so young, so youthful, who's got so much going on. Not only are you the GM of the Ignite, you're also going back and forth to University of Michigan Business School, getting your, executive MBA. Tell us, what you got going on, daily life, daily grind of a, general manager for the NBA G League Ignite.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and feelings mutual as it goes for you. We leave for Singapore tomorrow. That's the most tangible thing. So we have a 3-game trip to Singapore. So this past week, for example, was setting up the logistics for that. So that's the flights and sending in our rosters and our hotel and doing our practice schedule. Everything that goes into that 27-person travel party, across the world for 3 games. We moved into a new practice facility today in partnership with the city of Henderson, which is awesome. Our players are super excited about that. So we moved in. Now we have to, as people know when they move, we have to unpack and we have to get situated. And so we have that going on as well. And then last week we hosted the Perth Wildcats for 2 international exhibition games there at the Dollar Loan Center in Henderson. And so that's been my last 10 days or so.
It's a lot going on, but you've had the best training anybody can ever ask for. And I think that's really in part because of the pedigree you have. So let's talk about this. So, what was most fascinating that I thought from the beginning with you is that you really wanted to pursue a career in women's college coaching. Mm-hmm. So you go to Ohio State and you're kind of Ohio State. And you're a manager of the basketball team, and you're doing a lot of that kind of stuff. At what point in your career did you start kind of visualizing, maybe it's not coaching, maybe this is more so management that I want to get into?
Yeah, I went to Ohio State. I cold emailed one of the coaches there, and I went on the people directory, and I picked the coach that had the nicest looking smile on the page. And I thought, well, she looks nice. And so I looked her name up. Debbie Black is her name. She's a former WNBA player, and she's been a coach at Ohio State for a long time. Jim Foster was the head coach at Ohio State, who I believe he's now retired, but I believe he's top 10 all-time men's and women's all-time wins list. Oh. So really good mentor for me right from the beginning. But I picked Coach Black and emailed her and said, hey, I'd love to come by practice and just observe, really, at that time. And she emailed me back maybe 10 days later. And she said, hey, our first practice is on Friday. Why don't you stop by? And I went to the first practice. I stopped by, and then I never stopped stopping by. I just kept coming. And that turned into a formal offer to be a student manager. And so at the time, over the course of my 4 years, fortunately, we had 3 WNBA draft picks. So a pretty high-level team. We'd win some conference tournament championships, regular season championships, made the NCAA tournament every year. And I used to work camps in the summer, so I go work. Muffet McGraw was at Notre Dame at the time, and I go to Xavier camp, work Ohio State camps. And so trying to network and receive the visiting teams and make sure they're taken care of to try to set myself up to be a GA. That was what I wanted to do, was get a master's degree, which I ended up, as you alluded to, doing that 12 years later. But I wanted to be a GA, get a master's, maybe be a director of operations or video something, and then maybe get into coaching. And so when I graduated from Ohio State 2012, I applied. I sent letters, to people who I had met. I'm not one of those people that sends out 1,000 letters and you have this kind of letterhead and generic thing. It was, hey, Coach so-and-so, following up on our conversation, people that I'd met before, right? I got no responses back, 0 for 39.
Really?
Not no responses on we don't have anything. Sorry, great to hear from you. It was just crickets back, like
Wow.
just straight
Nothing.
ignore. Like if you and I were, like if you and I were talking, and I just get up and walk out of the room. Like it was just complete,
Wow.
like an ignoring of everything. So, the year before I graduated, while I was working at Chris Mack basketball camp, when Chris Mack was the head coach at Xavier, one of the guys who was working the camp had just come back from Vegas, working at a place called Impact. And Joe Bunazar runs this training facility called Impact. At the time, it was on Sunset, just south of the airport. And he kind of told me his story, gave me a point of contact there. I emailed that person and ended up coming out here my junior year, to work at the facility during the summer when NBA players would come in and they would just kind of train and try to stay in shape in the off season. So I did that my junior year. And then when I graduated my senior year, I graduated a quarter early because I had enough credits, finished at the NCAA tournament, and then came back and did that. That was pre-draft time. So agents will send their players there, train for the draft, get their nutrition right, all that stuff heading into the combine, and then NBA team workouts for the draft. And the San Antonio Spurs at the time were playing a playoff series against the Utah Jazz right up the street. So their two assistant GMs and one of the guys in scouting came down to watch workouts. And one of the assistant coaches at Ohio State, as you can see, this is all intertwined, right? This is kind of the way sports works. But one of the assistant coaches at Ohio State named Chris Gent had worked in Cleveland with the then assistant GM in San Antonio, Danny Ferry.
Okay.
And Danny was the GM in Cleveland. LeBron's like first run.
Yeah.
And so got their contact information, introduced myself briefly in person, applied to their internship program, got into that, was accepted into that, and then I've kind of gone on the last couple of years. But yeah, I wanted to be a women's college basketball coach, and just that wasn't in the cards.
Look at how that. I mean, there's so much amazing nuggets to take from that, because I think. And I'm seeing the parallels. There's so many people that come and sit in the same chair that you're sitting in, and it's like putting an outpouring of effort and energy into the universe to try for something, and then also a give and take where the universe kind of, shifts and shapes your journey a little bit more than you were even imagining. But let's talk about the Spurs organization, because I think what you're doing here with the Ignite, it's, the cream of the crop, and the guys that are coming through this program are, changing the landscape of the NBA. So let's start with what you saw in San Antonio. I mean, I'm a big Popovich fan. What is the organization? Why is it such a well-oiled run machine in San Antonio from the inside looking out? Tell us about that.
I was really lucky to be there at the time. This was a 2012-13 season. Kawhi's second year in the league, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. Right. We signed Tracy McGrady at the end of the regular season heading into the playoffs. So those were that was a player group, right? Obviously, Pop was the head coach. R.C. Buford at the time was a general manager, who's now the president of the whole kind of Spurs Sports and Entertainment. So Pop and R.C. were kind of the cornerstones of both the coaching staff and then management front office. But that year alone, Pop's assistants were Mike Budenholzer, who went on to be the head coach in Milwaukee, won a championship. Brett Brown, who went to be the head coach of the Philadelphia. Ime Udoka, who's now a two-time head coach. Will Hardy, who's the head coach at Utah. It was the assistant video coordinator at the time. Taylor Jenkins was the head coach of the Austin Toros of Memphis. The D-League, who's now the head coach in Memphis. Then on the front office side, and I think I'm probably missing one in there, on the front office side, it was Scott Layden, who went to be the GM of Minnesota. Trajan Langdon, who's now the GM of the New Orleans Pelicans, was a regional pro scout based out of D.C. at the time. Sean Marks was the GM of the same Austin Toros, now the GM of the Brooklyn Nets. So I had a ton of established mentors there, and I tell RC this all the time. To his credit, and I didn't realize this in the moment, but in reflection, there were people who were very comfortable with themselves as people, to then enable, like they empowered then other people, and they allowed young people like myself to be in meetings. I didn't do anything in the meetings besides take notes and make sure that things were printed on time, but I was in the room, and that was how I learned. And I still remember when the same Dennis Lindsay and Danny Ferry had just left. They were the assistant GMs that came down to that workout. Dennis went to become the GM in Utah. Danny went to Atlanta, I believe. And so RC was going through the process of hiring a new assistant GM. I joke with him and say that he hired me to replace Dennis because chronologically that was what happened. But, of course, I was an intern at the time. But RC brought me in his office. One of the first things RC ever asked me to do was to help him go through kind of the organization and the process of the kind of the behind-the-scenes look of hiring an assistant GM. Well, in that, those guys had been there for so long, and Pop's assistants had been there for so long. So in finding the next one, he really had to explain everything about the Spurs to that person, to these candidates. And, of course, one of the candidates ended up being Scott, who was hired, who's a good friend of mine to this day. But in doing that, he kind of outlined everything that had been successful with the Spurs up to that time. So that was how I learned.
So what were those things? I mean, tell me, like, if in a brief, kind of encapsulation, what are those pillars that make the Spurs the Spurs?
Yeah, well, they had a set of values that they don't compromise on. Character, selflessness, pound the rock were their three values that are unique to them. And so that scales across. That was both for, how we select players. That was how we run a medical meeting. That was, kind of just how they behave on a daily basis. But I think the biggest thing that I learned was the integration of the various functional areas within the organization. So you hear a lot in sports about, well, the GM and the head coach don't get along. And, the conflict between now analytics and coaching, sports performance or sports medicine and coaching, right? You see all these conflicts, right? There were very few of those there because the people leading the respective departments had been there so long. Again, they were very competent. They were very comfortable with themselves and each other to be open. They understood that we're all wearing T-shirts with the same logo on it, and so we need to embrace some of the the different motives of the different groups, but all working in the same direction. So there was a high level of integration, whether that be from the scouting department to the coaches, medical with the coaches, analytics into scouting, like all these different functional areas. High level of integration because of the leadership of Pop and RC respectively.
So it's so fascinating because to me, I think in sports, there's these figures like the Popoviches, the Belichicks, Mike Holmgren, in football, like Andy Reid, and all these guys kind of funnel out from these trees and they start making their own coaching trees, So it's a nice thing. The fascinating thing, though, is there's always an issue, I feel, and maybe the Spurs didn't have that, which is so great, is like people always looking out for their best interest after the fact. Like I'm from Philadelphia. I'm an Eagles fan. You go to the Super Bowl, we lose both coordinators and Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon. Jonathan Gannon can't even focus on winning a Super Bowl because he's more fixated on auditioning and interviewing for the Arizona Cardinals job. And now we come out and find that he wasn't really maybe even in the right headspace during that period. So how do the Spurs combat that and making it all about success and the Spurs, but also then part of that is, the follow through and the fostering of talent that, goes out and does amazing things on their own.
Yeah, I think they embrace the idea of, if you go on like the talent spectrum, right? From ID to eval to development to performance to retention. Obviously in the retention part is where over really the better part of the last decade, they've lost a lot of people.
Right.
But that's a compliment to what you're doing. And the other thing is, I think, some people are there and they leave and they don't quite understand why certain things were really positive and conducive to performance while they were there.
Gotcha.
And so if you go and you try to cookie cutter it, whether if I'm an assistant coach in San Antonio, where I have a generational person, not even a generational talent, but just a generational person in Tim Duncan.
Right.
They had different ownership structure at the time. I mean, Peter Holt Sr. there, his son is, now they've kept it in the family, but you had an owner who was an empowerer of people and was not a micromanager and invited the entire organization to his house for preseason. It was just very warm. So you had these unique characteristics organizationally at the time. So if you are then going to leave and you intend on doing the same thing in Brooklyn or Memphis or Minnesota or wherever that you did in San Antonio, well, that wouldn't be wise because it's a totally different space.
And the variables
totally
could change.
They will change.
Right.
That's guaranteed. So the best ones that have left from like an organizational creep standpoint have said, okay, this is what was really successful. This is what I learned. Now this is how I need to adapt it. And that was when I left San Antonio, went to Sacramento. I had to take what I learned there and say, okay, this is not Sacramento, right? We're not in Kansas Dorothy anymore, right? Like there's a new organization in a new place. There are some things that translate from a process standpoint and kind of from an overall direction standpoint that would be wise for us to implement. But we can't do it like San Antonio does, because if we try to replicate what they do, they're going to do it better because they've been doing it way longer.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And let's do a quick overview of your career so far, because before we jump into the Ignite. So, so we learn the Ohio State University. You're there. You end up, getting this internship with the Spurs. You go basketball operations with the Kings or with the Stockton Kings after a bunch of years as a GM. And now you're here with the G League Ignite heading into year 2 for you, and it's the 4th year in existence for the Ignite. I think one last thing I just want to mention on your personal journey is this all sounds, as somebody's listening to us right now, is thinking, wow, what an incredible gift that Anthony received to be able to, work with the Spurs and be in those rooms and have, the osmosis of being around Budenholzer and Udoka and Pop and R.C. Buford and all these great people. But it's hard. The journey is hard. Talk about the McNuggets, because I think the McNuggets is the best representation you can explain to our audience about. It's not just about, yes, it's an amazing opportunity, but then the grit to continue on that journey. That's a whole thing. And that's why when you were telling me at practice about these McNuggets, and we're going to get to the McNuggets in a second, folks.
This is not a plug for McDonald's, by the way. I get nothing out of this. Yeah.
But that encapsulated everything I thought about you as a human being, because I was like, that's why you were in that room, is because of that grit. So explain to the audience the story of the McNuggets.
Yeah. When I came out here the first time, summer of my junior year, I was in college. You get paid a little bit as a man. I remember we would get per diem on the flight back from road games in college, and it would be like $12 or something, and it was in cash. And I thought that it was the greatest thing, because my first thought is like, that's 2 Chipotle burritos for me while I was in college. So that's kind of the headspace that I was in coming out here. So I paid my own way, flight, and I got a VRBO. This was before Airbnb, and then this was before Uber and Lyft. So I paid my own way. I found a VRBO at the Signature at MGM because it was the closest hotel to where the facility was at Impact. I would call a taxi or get a taxi every morning to go in. And I remember watching the meter as we would go along the highway, along the strip there near the airport, and just watch the meter. And every time the meter would click, I would lose a little bit of inside of me, because I knew it was expensive. But so I would leave, we would work, 10, 12 hours a day, rebounding, mopping the floor, getting the water bottles ready, doing ice, all the stuff that I did as a manager. And I would come back to the Signature, and there was a food court. There is still a food court at MGM. I don't think the McDonald's is there anymore, unfortunately. I tried to prop it up while I could, but I think it's gone now. But I would go in and I would get a 20-piece chicken McNuggets for dinner every day. And this is like 2 straight weeks. And I would not advise our players to do this, but it was the most calories per dollar that I could find. And it was right next to the Nathan's hot dogs, but the one hot dog was like the same price as 20 McNuggets. And so that's what I would eat every day for dinner. And because I didn't have money, and it was just a way to
live,
to stay in it, right? And it was a way, as you said, to get me in the gym. And I had to find some way to get in the gym. And if I was in the gym, and the other part is, I think you have to get over yourself, right? And because it's easy, because pro sports is such a bubble, and such an anomaly, really. Like, this isn't the way the real world works. So it's easy to think that I'm way more important than I really am. And, well, I do this job and I have these relationships, and, well, if I left, how would they ever do this? And it's like, there are very few people in pro sports that if they just straight up and leave, it just doesn't keep on going, right? And that goes for athletes to coaches to whoever, right? Calvin Johnson in football, right, decides to retire, and the Lions still exist, right? They're still going to play games, and as great of a player as he is. So you really have to get over yourself and be willing to fill the water bottles, arrange the chairs so they're nice, mop the floor every morning, hang the towels, fold the towels, fold them the right way, And then in doing that, I'm going to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch, and I'm going to eat 20-piece chicken McNuggets for dinner.
I love it. So, take-home messages. I mean, the humility, the grit, and the being able to, have that foresight and be that present while you're in that moment, because there's so much other stuff going on in your head and you're just grinding. But to have that presence of mind is a very impressive thing. So, amazing. And I think it's such a full circle thing, because I still think you're at the beginning of your career, and there's so much more that you're going to accomplish within the world of basketball. But it's kind of a full circle moment to see, not only now that you're, I'm sure, applying the principles of the Spurs to the Ignite, but you're, the general manager of a team where last couple weeks I was there with you, and now all these general managers for the NBA who are your peers, who are your friends, people you looked up to, are now there scouting your players. How did that feel?
Yeah, it's I don't feel any certain way about it. For me, it's great for the players because this is why they're here for Ignite. We can get into that in a second, but and part of our education is to help them understand how teams work. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I try to help them do. And so to have a general manager come watch you practice, for example, GMs of professional sports teams are limited with their time and their bandwidth, and so to have that type of attention on you so early in your career is a testament to the caliber of player that we have. And so whether that's a GM or a president or directors, VPs, had some head coaches, we've had head coaches come through, to have them take time and dedicate some attention to you as the player. That's why I'm here, right? To help set the table for that. I'm obviously not the only one, but to help set the table and provide an environment where it makes sense for a GM to do that. And then we have to, of course, select the players and make it worth it.
I love it. So let's get into the Ignite and what makes the Ignite special. So before we do that, let's set the stage. So, traditionally, when you and I were growing up, top basketball players from, their region, from their states, guys like Ron Holland, who's, now, the top guy with you guys. He comes from Duncanville. And he's the best player in Texas getting recruited. He's McDonald's All-American. Back in the old days, those guys would just go to the elite programs, the Ohio States, the Kentuckys, the Dukes, all those types of places. Now there's a shift. And I think the first person I recognize really making a lot of these electives, back in the old days, high school players would go straight to the NBA too. We know that with T-Mac and LeBron and Garnett, bunch of different guys. But when it was instituted that you need another year out of high school of eligibility, we saw a lot of one-and-dones. We saw players doing different things. Brandon Jennings goes to Italy or something before even electing to go to a college. He'll do that, make some money, and then go to the NBA. Now we're seeing the G League Ignite in particular become this haven for incredible prospects. You have Ron, you have Modest. Now people are electing to do that over going to UT. I think Ron wanted to go to UT, and then he decides, I'm going to come to the G League Ignite. And he told me, quote, I chose the Ignite because it will help me reach my potential. Tell me how the G League Ignite is helping players like Ron reach their potential. The first thing I would say is not for everybody, right? I think there was this misconception when Ignite was launched a couple years ago. We were trying to disrupt college basketball. That's not the case. We all love college basketball and college athletics, and it has its place. And as you mentioned, I spent a lot of money going to school, so we're not anti-school or anti-college. But for a select group of players with a goal of becoming a great NBA player, and meaning all-star 15, 18-year career, which is really rare, right? If that's your goal and you have that elite type of potential, this is the place for you to be. And we could get into the on-court, off-court, all of it. Let's start with the team. You're playing with pros. So the very best college basketball team in a given 5-year stretch might have 3 or 4, if they're lucky, future pros on the team while they're in college. That's an anomaly, though. We have that every day, every year, no matter what. Every single player is a pro. So in Ron's example, Matas Buzelis, who's another really highly rated player for us,
had already committed to us. We had 2 projected first-round picks that were on the roster currently. So Ron knows this coming in.
Right.
A lot of times when you're the guy in high school, you're the 5-star recruit, McDonald's All-American, all of that, you're going to a place and they're saying you're the guy. Right? Ron is going and saying with us, in Ron's case, I want to be one of the guys. Of course, then he now wants to be the best that he can be, but he knows what he's getting into coming in. I want to play with other great players, which is one of the biggest hurdles that I've seen in my career with players going from pre-NBA in whatever capacity to NBA is, well, now if I'm Dyson Daniels, who we had a couple years ago, I'm the starting point guard for the Ignite. I'm playing next to Jaden Hardy, who was a draft pick for the Mavericks. I'm playing next to Scoot Henderson, who was a number 3 overall pick. I have to learn to play with other really good players. And so now Dyson does that with Ignite, and now he's going to go play with Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, these guys who are
Right.
all-stars, and now I have to acclimate. Well, he's already gone through that process of figuring out what am I really good at. Because the other thing, too, is these young guys, rightfully so, are probably the best player on every team they played on for the last 6 years of their life, from the time they're like 12 to 18 or 11 to 17. I'm the best shooter, rebounder, ball handler, athlete, whatever. Now, a Leonard Miller last year, who was a draft pick in Minnesota, he led his team in every statistical category for as long as he can imagine. Well, now all of a sudden, he's not the best shooter on the team because we actually have a guy who's got an Olympic gold medal, former first-round pick of the NBA named John Jenkins next to him. So I'm not going to shoot all the balls. And so you have that type of dynamic coming in of I'm really, really good, but what am I elite at? And how do I contribute in a professional game every single time? Because that's what an NBA head coach is going to require you to do. And so you have that process. Every day on the team, that's your competition, is each other. Then and it's really a commentary on the G League as a whole, the competition that we play against is pro. They're NBA players. Half of the players that we play against, half of the NBA currently rostered players have G League experience, over half, I think, now.
Wow.
So within the first 2 weeks of the season, last year, we're playing against Ousmane Dieng, who was first-round pick, Ochai Agbaji, who was a first-round pick, in addition to players such as Jamias Ramsey, who was on an NBA roster for a long time. Trey Burke was a matchup for Scoot Henderson last year, who was the National Player of the Year lottery pick 10 years ago, right? The guy's still a pro from Michigan. And so this is Scoot Henderson's competition.
Right.
So now when Scoot goes to the NBA, he's already played against pros.
Right. It makes a huge difference. And from so on court, I think we get that idea. The other thing that I just love from being an outsider and having been to a couple practices now is seeing just the way it functions like an NBA organization. You know, I'm sure, like, you know, from the workout room to, you know, dealing with PR and manage. I mean, so just talk about the encapsulating, just becoming a professional in all aspects, how that also kind of helps maybe the psyche of players as well.
Yeah, everybody on our staff has some type of NBA experience. So, you know, I worked eight years in the NBA. Sharif Abdurrahim, the president of the G League, who helped launch Ignite, obviously has a great pedigree. Jason Hart, our head coach, played in the NBA for a number of years. Our head athletic trainer worked with me and Sharif in Sacramento. Our strength and conditioning coach, the same. So everybody has NBA experience. That was one of the things that I was surprised with, and even when I was kind of in between before Ignite, was you go to these colleges and they we can help you get to the NBA. Well, there's 0 years of NBA experience on their staffs.
Right.
So why don't you just be great at college, right, and do that? And
right.
So very genuinely, when we message to players and we say, look, we can help you get to the NBA. Well, we are the NBA.
Right.
We have been in the NBA, and I've been in the room, and I have literally picked up the phone and called in a draft pick for De'Aaron Fox, for example.
Really?
Like, I've held the phone.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's my crowning moment. I was a big De'Aaron fan. I was a big De'Aaron fan.
He's a
Still
great
am.
player, yeah.
Still am a big De'Aaron fan. So we've done that, right? So the leaders of the various departments are NBA and have NBA experience and can speak to firsthand experience and relationships there.
Right.
So we have the on-court piece, health and performance, all of the things that they do from nutrition, movement assessment,
Right.
all these athletic testing, right? We bring in.
Yeah.
Off court, we teach them. A lot of our guys, we help them open a bank account. We help them with the kind of first steps of investing their money, and they take purposeful entrepreneurship courses
Right.
and brand management and financial literacy.
It's
And so, yeah, everything we try to do is purposeful towards what they have told us that they want to be, and that's a professional athlete. But being a professional athlete involves a lot more than just the on-court performance. It involves all of the other
100%.
dynamics. And so we try to provide them with as much support as they need to be the best professional athlete holistically.
It's amazing. And just a rundown for you at home. I mean, just some of these guys, that coming from this program, guys like Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, Scoot Henderson, high quality individuals that even just in their pre-draft interviews and throughout their seasons that we've seen, they have an edge and a great attitude and a head on their shoulders. So it's a very special thing to witness. So let's talk a little bit about this. So the G League Ignite functions a lot differently though than other G League organizations. So you were with the Stockton Kings. Tell us, for everybody at home, kind of the distinction between the advantages and the disadvantages that the Ignite have, and kind of how you function a little differently than opposing G League teams.
Yeah, so there are 29 affiliated G League teams with NBA parent franchises. Stockton being one of them, in my experience with Sacramento. My role, and then in having the Stockton Kings as a part of the NBA umbrella, was to do everything in direction of the NBA team. So, for example, we signed Wenyen Gabriel at the time to a two-way contract for the purpose of developing him as a future, hopefully, Sacramento Kings player. Daquan Jeffries. We had Gabe Vincent, who's one of my best friends in the league and a great mentor. We signed him out of UC Santa Barbara for the purposes of hoping that he's going to then develop to contribute as an NBA player, ideally for your parent organization, in his case, the Miami Heat, which is great for him. So everything really with those 29 teams are in alignment for furthering the purpose of your NBA team, which ultimately is to make money and win games.
Right. It's a farm system kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we are unique. We are truly unique in pro sports globally, in that our only focus is to help the individual grow and, again, contribute as a holistic professional basketball player. That could either be for young players or the veterans that we have. Everything we do, everything that we structure and build the environment is to further the individual development of each player. And so we're absent. Of course, we want to compete and we want to win, and that's a big part of development, but it's not the main purpose.
Right.
The main purpose is to get the 18-year-old that comes and wants to be a great NBA player, to get him drafted, to maximize his readiness to be an NBA player, or it could be in a Jarrett Jack in year 1 or Pooh Jeter year 2 and 3's case of, I've had a great pro career, I'm at the end, I can play, I want to still play, but I want to start thinking about what I'm going to do after basketball, such that these players play with us. They're veteran mentors to, in Jarrett Jack's case, a Jalen Green. Now I'm going to go and I'm an assistant coach for, at the time, the Phoenix Suns. Or in Pooh Jetter's case, I've had a long career. I want to get into coaching, maybe broadcasting, maybe something. But while I'm thinking about that, I can still play and contribute and help Dyson Daniels and Jaden Hardy and Scoot Henderson. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to work for the Portland Trail Blazers. So everything is set up for the individual.
It's a beautiful thing, and it's such a genius concept, because I think other sports leagues must be so envious of the familial qualities and, the way it's taking care of former players, future players, coaches, the support staff, all that kind of stuff is super special. And these guys are making a big mark. Everybody's so excited to see Scoot. He got drafted at 3. Jalen Green was number 2. I mean, these guys are going to be major superstars, it looks like, in the NBA. Let's talk a little bit about the current roster. So, I mean, obviously you guys had a great showing against Perth Wildcats. Holland 25 and 33 in those 2 games. Talk a little bit about him first, and then we'll touch base on Modest a little bit, and then get into some of the other guys. But what makes Ron so great?
Oh, gosh, where do you start? I think just foundationally, he reminds me a lot of Scoot in his approach. He's extremely competitive. His information retention and absorption is at maybe the highest level that I've seen in a young player, and that could be drawing up an after timeout set during the game, or it could be, telling him, what to wear at a charity golf tournament or whatever.
Right.
Like just his information, the way that he processes information is incredible. Very athletic, again, super competitive. You saw there was a stretch in game 2 where he came off the bench in the second quarter and just changed the game, just completely changed the game with the effort that he puts in on defense. He's a two-way player, gives as much effort to offense as he does defense. He's versatile. So he's off to a great start for sure. And Perth is the legit.
Right.
I told the guys in the huddle, Perth is the Los Angeles Lakers of the Australian NBL. They've won more championships than anyone else. Bryce Cotton, their point guard who lit us up in game 2, is a 2-time league MVP. These are legitimate pros. I remember being in Sacramento when Bryce came out of Providence. We had him in for a pre-draft workout.
Wow.
So again, this is a guy who's been a pro at a high level for a long time. Here's your competition.
Right. It makes a difference rather than just playing, some, good, players at the D1 level, but guys who really aren't going to be able to play,
Right.
Maybe they can play overseas, but not really
Right.
here in the States.
Right.
Tell me, I don't know much about basketball, but, when I look at Ron, I'm saying, wow, this guy is so talented. If he really develops a knockdown jump shot, perimeter-wise, kind of like the same thing with Kawhi. When he comes out of San Diego State, which is so special about the Spurs organization, a lot of guys like that who are the 3-and-D guys, they never develop that 3, and they come out and their potential, their ceiling is limited because they don't cultivate that scoring ability.
Right.
And you saw that from, the trade with the Pacers and the Spurs, and then he ends up cultivating that. His game takes a whole nother level, 2-3 levels.
Yep.
Is that something where, like, when you go to the Ignite, you're working on those things, like you're saying, because you're playing and you got to find elite ways to find the elite qualities of your game, but you also have to raise your level. Maybe at San Diego State, you're not forced to do that because that level of competition. Is that kind of what you're talking about? And whereas Ron's going to be able to work on those things now, even before he gets to the position to draft.
Right. I think if the best players, right, that I've been around, embrace the idea of want to play with other great players. If you play on a team with lesser talent, you might be forced to do things that are not necessarily reflective of your professional game.
Right.
So in Daquan, I'll use Daquan as an example, who's now with the New York Knicks. He's made a really nice career for himself. We had Daquan out of Tulsa. He was undrafted out of Tulsa. We signed him to a 2-way contract. Right. He was playing out of position in college out of necessity,
right? Because
he had to, because the college coach is getting paid to win college basketball games. So I can't speak for Kawhi really, but in Ron's case, Ron, for us, like all the other young players, we try to, as much as possible, put them in a position to play reflective and develop their projected NBA position and NBA skill contributions. And so Ron will be in a position to expand his game, but also in a position to leverage the talent around him, which is going to make the game easier for him.
Right.
And so, again, instead of viewing that as a negative, he, to his credit, among the other Ignite players that we have, view that as a positive.
It's a great thing, and I think that veteran leadership, the guy like John Jenkins, I remember when he was at Vanderbilt, and this guy was coming out, a great shooter.
Yep.
And, so it's special to see that in guys like Amir Johnson, just that osmosis that you're getting. It is a different kind of thing. Let's talk a little bit about this. So, the other component to this is with the NIL and how players are, engaging differently with the NCAA now because they're getting paid. A great thing that the Ignite is doing is it's the same thing. I mean, these guys, like a Scoot, he opted out of senior year of high school, spends 2 years
Well, he graduated early.
Oh, he graduated early.
Scoot, and this is, people didn't, I think when I spoke, not to get down this tangent, but I think when I spoke about Scoot, people would think that I'm just making it up because it sounds too good to be true. Scoot graduated early from high school with honors.
So then,
and he was a great basketball player.
So he was already done junior year.
He was done.
So senior year was just like...
Yeah, they don't forego their senior year. They graduate early such that they can... Scoot was the youngest pro, I believe the youngest pro ever in the United States. Youngest professional basketball player ever.
How old was
17.
Whereas like Luka Doncic is playing professional at like 14.
Right.
But in the States,
in the
it's
United
different.
States, correct.
So you're saying Scoot was 17 when you signed him because he was technically done with
Yes.
schooling.
He had graduated high school early with honors. Yeah. He's an incredible He's an incredible story. Yeah.
So he spends 2 years here, and just talk about his development from 17 to then getting drafted by the Trailblazers at 3. I mean, what did he develop more than anything else? Because I'm sure he's just a special case. But what did you see, you think, that he developed mostly from?
I think so. He came in, and to his credit, he's played all over the place. So when Portland and Charlotte and San Antonio call me, and in Portland and Charlotte's case with Damian Lillard and LaMelo Ball, respectively, they have these two guys on their teams. And they say, hey, well, how do you think Scoot would do playing next to these guys? I can go and say, well, Scoot's come off the bench behind Dyson Daniels.
Right.
He's played beside John Jenkins. He's played beside Jaden Hardy. He's already played with pros in a number of different capacities. So, yeah, Damian Lillard's a great player, and we're not comparing him, but philosophically, he's already done all of this. So that's one aspect of it. The other one I think is really important is you can be a great basketball player, but not make your teammates better, right? You can be a great scorer, you can be a great athlete, you can be whatever. You see these guys all the time. We won't mention them, but they're really, really good players, and some of them are all-stars, multi-time all-stars, and their teams are terrible, right? And it's a team sport, and it's not just their fault, but, you know, the best players win championships, and the best players raise the level of play of their teammates. So Scoot came in, and, you know, 17 years old, freak athlete, had a ton of ability. He, over the course of the last 2 years, especially last year, had to figure out, okay, how do I sustain my level of incredible performance and execution and production, but also then help my teammates do the same thing, you're thinking about now yourself and everyone at the same time, especially as a point guard.
That's a really special thing. It's so funny that you mentioned that. That makes a lot of sense. How much do you, when you're as a general manager, you're scouting, you're looking for guys that are gonna make the Ignite better, qualities, attributes, how much of it is, if we're building the perfect player, how much of it's mental and just have the attitude and, Ron, you're not really talking, yeah, of course he can attack the rim and defensively plays two-way basketball, all these great things, but you're talking about his absorption of knowledge and material, his sponge-like attitude is what you're referring to. With, Scoot, it just sounds like he was like a workaholic, a guy who's just a grinder it means a lot to him to be at a certain place. How much of it is really the mental thing, and how many of those are those the reasons why a lot of these guys end up becoming the greats?
Yeah, it's a huge part of it, because
is it more important?
More or less wouldn't be the way I would think of it, but it's a differentiator for sure, because when you get to the NBA, you're in Scoot's case, you're trying to be the top 1% of 1% of 1%, maybe of 1% or whatever. The math ends up working, right? So you are going against players who are as athletic, if not more athletic than you, who have put in more reps at player development and gotten more shots up, et cetera, than you. So how are you going to then make up for that? Or in the case of the best players, how are you going to prevent other players from catching you if you're already at the front? And so if you take the case of, I'll give this speech to our players at some point. You go into an NBA playoff kind of, at the end of the season, the NBA structure of the NBA playoffs. You play a 7-game series against a really good team. If you're fortunate enough to win that, now you have to play another 7-game series against a better team. And then you have to do that again. And then you have to do that again. So the little details matter when you get into Game 5, Game 6, Game 7 on the road in a playoff series. Knowing your personnel, paying attention to coverage changes, lineup combinations, sub-patterns, things like that. But the little details, court spacing, defending without fouling, sustaining possession, sustaining a game, sustaining a series, takes a really big mental toll. And there's an aspect of that they get here also, where you're playing the same opponent multiple times, maybe in a back-to-back, for example, which weighs on you. That doesn't happen in college, where you play the same team, back-to-back games. So in that second game, as we saw with Perth, they make adjustments. You better make some adjustments too. And to Perth's credit, they did. So that the mental part of that, the film study, the individual film study, the collective film study, all of that is important, which is woven into the way that we try to prepare our players also.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Mattis Bucelis. So,
Yep.
him and Ron are really the guys. I mean, a lot of pre-mock drafts are having them high up. I mean, maybe even 1 and 2. Some people have them.
Yep.
And, you guys have had so many people drafted already, but there's a lot of excitement about those two guys. Ron, we know a little bit about. Let's talk about Mattis. Do you say Mattis or Mattis?
Matas is.
Matas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, he rightfully so. I will say the hype for those guys. He is incredibly gifted from a skill standpoint. Can handle the ball. He's the type of guy that I just said. When he's on the floor, your team is better because he knows how to play. He facilitates offense. He can make a play for himself, but he also will move without the ball, and he'll create opportunities because he's a threat for his teammates. And so he does that on offense. Underrated athlete, right? Above the rim, we saw that multiple times in the Perth game. So whether that's as a rebounder, as a finisher at the rim, very crafty right-hand, left-hand finisher. And he's tough. We're working on his strength. Obviously, that's going to be something that is a big part of his development, as in most of our players when they come in, they're right out of high school. But he's tough, and he's you can coach him hard, and he embraces the grind of getting better. He wants the best matchup. He wants the best competition. He's been a great player for a long time, and just the mentality that he brings to the game, I think, will translate for what I project will be a really, really strong NBA career.
And it's exciting for these guys because I think, like, when London Johnson signed, he had signed the largest contract in history, right, for G League when he originally did. So I'm assuming Ron and Mattis, it's now even more, right?
Well, it's part of being a pro, right? You are paid a salary to perform services, and I think that's a differentiator from college where, I'm not going to get into, because I don't know exactly the inner workings of NIL and how different universities do it, but this is very straightforward. You're signing a professional contract, and you provide services in return for that, and you're a part of the professional ecosystem, and the Players Association embraces that and all of that. So it's very straightforward. It's very transparent. We ask a lot of these guys, and it is a difficult journey for them to become part of an elite group of NBA players. In return from that, you get paid a salary, as you should, if you display an elite skill.
Which I think, and it's a great thing. And I've had people in this chair, like, Spencer Haywood, guys who have gone up, against the Supreme Court in terms of, the trials and tribulations of their family dynamics and having, to, just wanting some sort of compensation so they can, as universities are making money off of them. So I think this is a great thing as we're leading into a new era, into a new world. And it's a great thing. Real quickly, before we wrap up here, a few things. One, a couple other guys I just would love to hear you mention who we should be excited about. I know guys like CD and stuff, but maybe a few people at home just, beyond Mattis and Ron who you're really excited about.
Yeah, so one of the things that I enjoy from a personal standpoint about Ignite is, we talked about Ron, we talked about Matas, Jalen Green, those guys have come from the United States. We've also had, as I mentioned, Dyson Daniels come from the NBA Academy system, so the Global Academy in Australia. And Dyson Daniels, Mojave King last year was selected in the second round of the draft, came out of that system. A guy, Babacar Sane, came from the NBA Academy in Senegal, and then one of his former cohorts, or in the next cohort, is Thierry Darlin, who came out of the NBA Academy also. And so we're pulling from a really global talent pool now, which is exciting for me because you hear different languages, you learn about new foods and new cultures, and it really expands, again, just on a personal level.
Yeah.
So Babacar, we mentioned London Johnson coming back. London had a whole year last year going against Scoot Henderson, who ended up being the number 3 pick. That was his matchup every single day in practice. So I'm excited to see him come back for a second year. Ethan Almanza came to us this year from Spain. I believe is the only 3-time World Championship MVP. So led his country to a championship this past year, was the MVP of the U19 World Championships. He's another highly rated draft prospect. And then Tyler Smith also came to us this year. He'll be, I think, a high potential player. another one of those big-time recruit U.S.-based guys. And so that's the group that we have coming in this year. So a lot of, hopefully we can get a lot of those guys drafted. Again, it's a dual purpose of helping them get drafted highly, but then also making sure that they're ready to contribute to an NBA team.
And let's talk about this. I mean, reflecting back to the McNuggets and your time here in Vegas and, doing all that stuff, the shift here in Vegas as a sports capital of the world. And, what kind of role do you think the Ignite's going to play in just, bringing a whole nother excitement to this city? The Aces have done an incredible job of drumming up a lot of enthusiasm for basketball, but, people want the NBA and people love basketball. And, I think the Ignite is a special thing here. Tell us about the role that you think the Ignite's is going to play from a community perspective.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is this is the NBA. These guys are the NBA, and they will change the face of the NBA for what we hope is going to be the better part of the next decade or two. And in Vegas here now, in Henderson at the Dollar Loan Center, you have an opportunity to see these guys before they become that. And then with that, they become a little less accessible, a little more costly to go see. You can see them right here. And these guys are future NBA players, legitimately projected, right, to contribute to the NBA. So for a basketball fan, and I know Vegas has an incredible culture of basketball at the grassroots level. NBA Summer League is here. You have all the college conference tournaments. You have now the in-season tournament this December. So I know that the appetite for basketball is there. And so if you're a fan of high-level basketball and you follow this, you have an opportunity to see these guys right now. Not only see them play, but meet them. They'll stay after the game. We have an incredible group of guys. We had one last year as well this year. They'll come talk to you. They'll take pictures with you.
So all the kids, that's all something that happens.
They'll learn your name, and they'll remember your name, and they're just so accessible, and you can build that relationship. And we've had this is our fourth season of Ignite. This would be our second playing here in Henderson. We'll be out in the community. We want to meet the fans. We want to inspire people. That's a big part, again, of helping these guys understand and develop as professional athletes. You have a responsibility in the community to be inspirational to your fellow citizens and to your neighbors. And so that's a big part of this. And so, we're going to come out to the fans, and we want them to come out to us because all of this is cyclical and it builds on each other.
Yeah, and I think it's an exciting thing. The venue's beautiful. There's so much excitement surrounding the team, the organization, and we're so excited to be a partner with you guys here at Fox 5. It's amazing stuff. Any last words? Any other things you want to mention about Ignite? Anything else? Any words of advice? We've learned a lot about you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak just for myself, but I know that this is the sentiment of our players and staff. We love being here. It's a privilege to be here. It's, again, you don't just get to wake up and say, oh, I would like to be a part of Ignite. There's an aspect of luck and relationships in the preparation. And so I think just overall, we're very grateful to be here. We're very grateful to you guys and to Fox 5 and to the community, Henderson, the Valley in large. And again, we want to give that gratitude back in the form of putting out a great product on the court and again, meeting and being out in the community and hopefully making it a better place while we're here and into the future.
And last piece of advice, because I know we were talking about this as we were coming in the room, any advice for somebody who wants to be you? What would you say?
I shoot higher, I guess, first. But I think, there's a balance of figuring out what you want and then also then allowing, being open to new opportunities. And I say all the time, and when I reflect, if I would have gotten everything that I wanted at the time when I wanted it, my life would probably be miserable. I probably didn't know what was in my own best interest 10 years ago. I didn't have that knowledge and couldn't possibly. So I think find out who you want to be as a person. Find people who are similar to that and can help you achieve that and empower you to do that and inspire you to do that. Outside of that, everything else is going to take care of itself. The role, the money, the whatever, the gear you get or the job that you have. But find people that are like-minded and like-valued, and everything else will take care of itself.
And what's your dream? Do you have a new dream? Do you have a vision for what you want to achieve? What does Anthony McClish want in 25 years?
Yeah, I don't, taking my own advice, I don't have a title or a set of achievements or something. A trophy is just something that kind of sits on the desk. But if you can, the most rewarding moments for me, which is what it makes Ignite special for me, is giving knowledge and giving experiences to those around you and learning from those around you. And that is how I think you really get value out of what you've been able to accomplish. It's one thing to work for a Hall of Famer or be around Hall of Fame players. That's great. I could just keep that to myself, right? I was around Vince Carter, for example. It was an amazing person, an amazing player. Well, the value of me being around somebody like that and being put in those positions, how do I show gratitude for that, and how do I use that to its max, is I can then transfer those experiences and that information and that knowledge to someone else, such that then they can pay it forward. And hopefully, as you iterate on that, everyone around you is a little bit better than they would have been otherwise. And so that's the value of Ignite, again, is this is our job. Our job is to share information and to help other people, and we do it through basketball.
Wow. So much knowledge in this room, I have a headache. I mean, I've learned so much. The great Anthony McClish, thanks for being here.
Thank
the
you so
GM
much.
of the NBA G League Ignite. How much were those McNuggets when you used to buy that
$4.99.
$4.99. I wonder if they're what year was that?
This would have been 2011, 2010.
I wonder with inflation, they're probably a little bit more.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, and they might not give you the breadth of sauces that they
See,
give.
which,
You could pick
what
whatever
was your sauce?
It was like the sweet and sour, I think,
sweet
or
and
the,
sour,
or the
yeah.
chili, maybe one of those.
Sweet chili or one
yeah,
of those.
something like that. Yeah.
Awesome. There you
Yep.
go. We learned everything
Yeah.
about this great guy. Guys, listen, this is the Vegas Huddle. You can listen, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. This is also going to be on the Silver State Sports and Entertainment Network. And of course, we got so much great content coming your way when it comes to the NBA G League Ignite. You're not going to want to miss that. The great Anthony McClish. Thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it, my man.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
See you next time.